Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel. On this short video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous night of the local time. And first we're going to talk about Robotyne. If you remember yesterday, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to establish control over more than 50% of the settlement. But the Russians took a decision to stop. And today we got more updates about the purposes and the reasons why the Russians took a decision to stop and not to complete the clearing operation of Robotyne during the previous night. According to some sources, assault operations have been postponed to daylight hours. Additional engineering exploration is needed around the village and between Robotyne and Verbove. Several of Russian equipments ran into mines, chaotic, maybe even the remains of Russian barriers during the greatest Ukrainian counter-offensive operation. Furthermore, other sources reported that it's important to keep silence and the situation requires patience. Now, the Russian sources are saying that the Ukrainian armed forces should have come out a long time ago. The Russians were getting ready for that, but it didn't work out for a number of reasons, including they were held in crossfire by their own Ukrainian soldiers, friendly fire. So the thing is that when the Russians entered Robotyne and when the front line collapsed, a lot of Ukrainians started abandoning their positions with the attempt to run away to the north. But the thing is that there was still a lot of Ukrainian soldiers in the fields between Robotyne and Verbove. So that's why if the Ukrainians left Robotyne too early and the Russians, let's say, established complete control, then significant number of Ukrainian forces could appear in a cauldron inside of the fields. So that's why the Ukrainians took a decision to create the barriers, let's say anti-retreat barriers to the north with the purpose to slow down the abandoning process and not allow the Ukrainians to run away from the territory as early as possible. The Ukrainian soldiers who left the south and the central part currently try to concentrate their positions, their forces inside of the cemetery on the northern part of Robotyne, according to Rybor. So this is, let's say, the last defense belt of the armed forces of Ukraine, and this is not something the last defense belt, this is something like evacuation zone. And from this evacuation zone, slowly, step by step, the Ukrainians will move further to the north in direction of Novodanilovka. Probably this process will be finished today, and by the end of the 25th of February, the entire village will be under complete Russian control. During the previous days, the Ukrainians made few attempts to slow down and to stop the Russians with FPV drones, but most of them, to tell the truth, we got just two geolocated videos from Robotyne of two strikes. So one video was how the Ukrainians attacked the abandoned Russian personnel carrier, and as you can see, the Russians were trying to suppress and jam Ukrainian drone with electronic warfare equipment, and basically this is the only video we got from Robotyne. So basically the Ukrainians didn't show us any resistance during the battle for this strategical village. Now we are moving further to Orikhiv. The Russian sources, the Russians bombed Orikhiv start bombing Orikhiv in those days heavily. The Ukrainian sources published the video of results of one of those attacks. As you can see, the entire block was almost reduced to ruins, and Ukrainians are saying that significant losses took place in this area. Now we are moving further to the South Donetsk direction. We have no changes in the situation in comparison with the previous 24 hours. The Russians published few videos of bombings and attacking of Ugledar with aviation bombs. It doesn't mean that the Russians are planning to attack. Maybe the Russians may manage to discover some positions, and just a common situation in this area when the Russians are trying to stress the Ukrainian forces and not to give them to relax. Furthermore, we got additional details of Battle for Pobeda. The Russians currently shown today the Russians shown us the process of abandoning positions by the Ukrainian armed forces. After another artillery or FAB strike, the Ukrainians were buried under the ruins of another building, and after they managed to get out of the ruins, they start running away from positions from Pobeda, abandoning the village in Russian favor. And now we see the direction how the Ukrainians were abandoning their positions. Let's move to the last episode. We see the Ukrainians running through the tree lines in direction of this stronghold. So the Russians were bombing the last Ukrainian positions took place, were located here, and after the Russians reduced the still territory to ruins, the Ukrainians started abandoning their positions along this tree line in direction of, let's say, Novovelika, Novoselovka, and this tree line. So additional details about the territory, nothing special. No clashes were spotted during the previous night. Interesting details we continue receiving from Krasnohorivka direction. According to the Russians, the third day in a row, the Russians published additional information about additional artillery preparation and bombing of the settlement and city. The Russians start artillery preparation this morning, and we got the same update yesterday in the morning and the day before yesterday. The Russians were using FABs, artillery, and so on. And today the Russians start another attempt, but for now without any operation on the ground. Now we're moving to Avdiivka area. We got more details from the territory, yet we haven't received any details, any updates confirming the Russian control over Severne. Some mappers still show the territory as contested, like 50% under the Russian control and 50% either in the Ukraine control or in the gray zone. So probably this is the only thing that most of the people agreed. During the previous night, the Ukrainians either tried to stabilize the situation in this area. They sent some number of soldiers and infantry to the south, trying not just to stabilize but to hold and to win some time. Because currently, as I understand, the Ukrainians don't understand and don't know for sure what are they going to do next. Because according to the most of the military experts, if the Russians are able to establish control over Severne and let's say to move further to the northwest of the area, then the Russians will get significant possibilities to continue advancing their offensive operation further to the west in direction of the village by the name of Yasnobrodovka. This is the village, and if the Russians are able to get Yasnobrodovka, this will lead to complete collapse of Ukrainian defense belt in Itailo and Peromaiskaya. So once again, the main problem I'm trying to tell you and describe that Ukrainians haven't prepared the next defense belt. Basically, they didn't know for sure where exactly the Russians could develop their offensive and where exactly should be created the next defense belt. So now the only thing they can do is to win some time, to win additional day, additional hour, which will give the Ukrainians possibilities to create additional defense barrier or something like this. When talking about the northern part, we continue receiving updates about further Russian progress. The Russian progress in Orlovka and Lastochkyne was confirmed by pro-Ukrainian mappers Deep State, which also confirms the Russian gains and that the Russians are planning to move further in direction of Orlovka. Furthermore, the Ukrainians during the previous days and night tried to make some attempts to slow down the Russians, and they were bombing the Russian positions in the chemical plant with artillery, and some of Russian groups and soldiers got under the artillery fire, and probably another ammo depot was destroyed. But all those strikes can't change the entire situation. Furthermore, the Russians published another video, probably the second video in a row, of how they managed to discover and to destroy another US Patriot system. On this video, we can see how the Russian drone managed to discover the movements of a Patriot system, and after that, the Russians start moving after him, because it's not just important to destroy the air defense system, but also the ammo depot. But at some point, probably the Ukrainians understand that they were discovered. They basically abandoned the Patriot system, trying to save the personnel, and after that the Russians destroyed the system. So we understand that currently the Russians found the key approach how to win the special military operation, how to collapse the Ukrainian defense belt as fast as possible. And this is the combination of aviation bombing with guided bombs, of artillery strikes, and perfect work of infantry and stormtroopers. And if the Ukrainians are not able to restore control over the sky, obviously the situation in Ukraine can be collapsed very soon, and even this year. During the previous night, the Ukrainians made another HIMARS strike against the Russian positions, not just against the Russian positions, against some restaurant or cafe in the central part of Donetsk. According to information we have, there was a wedding was taking place in that area. About 60 people celebrated the wedding. People managed to survive. Just one person was wounded. Once again, as you can see, the Ukrainians start using HIMARS systems. They are no longer able to use artillery strikes to bomb Donetsk, just HIMARS long-range artillery. So this is one of the most important benefits, one of the most important goals that the Russians managed to achieve. Furthermore, other Russian sources, military experts, are saying that the next few days we're going to see significant number of attacks and storm operation, assault operation in different part of line of combat contact. The Russians will attack in Robotyne, in Zaporozhye area. The Russians will attack in Verbove tactical bridgehead in Ugledar. So the Russians are going to attack a lot, and they're going to attack all the way along the combat contact. And the main purpose of this attack is to stretch the Ukrainian focus and not to give them understanding explaining where exactly the Russians are going to make the primary attack. But when talking about primary attack, most of the experts confirms and agree that the next target is Kupiansk. And today, for example, the Ukrainian deputy reported to the Deutsche Welle that after the Kupiansk is going to be after Avdiivka, and the Ukrainians are saying, high authorities of Ukraine are saying that if Ukraine lose Kupiansk, then they will not be able to hold Kharkiv, and they will lose Kharkiv as well. So the situation for the Ukrainians, as you can see, is getting worse and worse. More details we got from Bakhmut Artyomovsk direction. The Russians continue offensive operation in Ivanovsk. Also, the Russians took a decision to take a small pause during the day and night period of time due to the, let's say, requirements of additional engineering reconnaissance operation, trying to understand what is happening. But obviously today, on the 25th of February, the Russians will proceed. They will continue a special operation and assault operation, not just in Ivanovsk, but in Robotyne as well. Very interesting details we got today from Tonenke direction. According to the Russian sources, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to conduct successful reconnaissance and force operation in direction of Tonenke. And according to some Russian sources, the Russians managed to enter Tonenke from these positions and establish control over few buildings. The Russians are saying that the Ukrainians didn't show any resistance, and when they saw the Russians, when they got under the first fire, the Ukrainians took a decision to step back towards the next defense belt. And so basically they abandoned their positions. And the Russians controlled the half of part of Tonenke for some hours. But later the Russians received an order to fall back due to the situation that they managed to discover significant concentration of Ukrainian forces with the purpose to counterattack the Russians. So the Russians fell back, and very likely the Ukrainians restored control. But the thing is that according to information the Russians managed to collect during that recon operation, the Russians took a decision to launch today a full-scale offensive operation in direction of Tonenke. So very likely that today we are going to see the first updates and the first clashes from inside of the village. And this is going to be probably the break moment in the entire, let's say, Kupiansk and South Kupiansk directions. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you, we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.